Assalamualaikum and welcome back to Coding with T. Today we're going to learn how to log in using Google Sign-in using Flutter Firebase. So let's first quickly have a look what we're going to create. Let's run the application. And once we are inside the application, you can see currently no user is logged in. So that's why we redirected to the login screen. And in here, in the previous tutorial, we learned how to log in using email and password. And you can see also when the application loads itself, it fetch the local email and password user stored last time using this remember me tick option. So this is what we covered in the previous tutorial. Whereas before getting started with the Google sign-in, let's also see the create account. In the create account tutorial, we first try to add authentication. Authentication is added, then we try to get all the details, make sure that this privacy policy terms of use is toggleable. We get all the data, create user using email and password. Once created, we pass all the data to the Firestore and store the user information inside our Firestore so that we can later fetch all the user details and redirect user to the next screen, which is to verify his email. And also, if user is going to close his application right from that state and retry to rerun this application, he will be redirected to the verification screen and he has to verify his email first in order to log in. So today we're going to start with the Google sign in when user is going to click on Google from either login or from the sign up. When you are going to click on this, it is going to load a bit. Then you will be able to see all the list of emails currently you are logged in using your device. Among all these, you have to choose your email. Once we are going to select it, again you can see we have the loader which is loading behind. Currently it's processing. It is going to check if data is already stored in the Firestore. It's not going to stored, but if it is not stored, user is new, he is trying to log in for the first time. So we first have to get his data, stored it in the Firestore, and then definitely you can see at the top we will pass user to our main application. And also in the profile you can see user email, user profile picture, name, and all the other information will be inside his profile. So this is what we are going to create in today's tutorial. If you're following, you can see we are creating Flutter e-commerce application and we are in the section 4 of our playlist. We are about to complete this playlist and the section 5 is the last section in which we are going to deal with the backend of our e-commerce application. After this e-commerce playlist, when this is going to be completed, we are going to start a new playlist which will be related to this one, and we are going to learn how to create admin panel, which will definitely be running on the website using the Flutter. Definitely we will also use the Firebase, and we will try to add all the data using that admin panel to our application. So before directly start jumping to the coding, the first thing is that how we are going to perform the Google sign-in authentication. The first thing is we are going to definitely add the dependency, enable Google sign-in from console, add SHA1 which is required for the Google to sign in. If you're going to skip part 2 and part 3, definitely you will not be able to perform Google sign-in. After that, we are going to create a function inside our authentication repository, which is going to handle everything related to the sign-in authentication. Then we will use the controller to start loading, check the internet connection, perform authentication, and store the data inside user Firestore if it's the first time of the user. And then definitely we will redirect user to the main screen. So let's get started. So we are inside our application, and in here in the terminal to add a new package, we are just going to run flutter pub add. Name of the package is Google sign in. Hit enter. Head towards the pubspec.yaml file, and it is going to add a new dependency over here. And you can see the latest, which is Google sign in 6.1.6 is added. Now head towards the Firebase console and open the project which we created in our previous tutorial. If you open the playlist, and you can see the setup Firebase setup tutorial. In this tutorial we learn how to set up Firebase account, and also we added SHA1 which is going to be used in today's tutorial, and also we learn how to add SHA256. So you can watch this tutorial. If you open that tutorial from the playlist, down below you can see you can also get the link of this playlist from here, and the pinned comment you can see generated SHA1 256 keys, one for the Mac, Windows and Linux. You should start from the key tool and definitely you will get SHA1 and 256. So let's first go to the Firebase console. Inside the sign-in method, we already enabled Google sign-in, but if not, you have to click on add new provider and enable this Google sign-in. Okay, once enabled, click on this gear icon, go to project settings, and inside you don't have to do anything for the iOS and web, but for the Android you have to add these two SHA1 and 256. So you just have to copy this right from here, and if you run this video you just head towards a point which is saying get SHA1 and 256. Right from this point you will be able to add SHA1 and 256. So once you have the SHA1 and 256 you will get it from here, and you have to copy individually each of them, paste it over here, and that's it. Now let's start coding. Open the authentication repository which we have already started, or if you're not following the series you can create this function anywhere where you are already working with the backend. So down below over here we have already completed login with email and password, register with email and passwords, and email verification. Already learned how to call the logout feature, but as it is federated identity, so we are going to work today on the Google sign-in. So simply copy these all try and catch values, the same function, and in here inside this sign in with Google I change the name to sign in with Google, and user credentials, this is what we are going to return from this function. And now we have to change this function whatever it is, but first let's talk about each of this exception, because previously I get a lot of requests that you didn't show us any of the class. These are the custom classes. The reason to create a custom classes is that we want the user to not see any technical error, because you see in the catch section over here I am printing this in the debug mode complete error, whatever it is, the complete exception, and simply returning null from this one, because I don't want the user to see whatever the technical error is. So at the top of these you can see first I'm calling the Firebase auth exception, getting that auth exception and throwing back again, throwing the Firebase exception, format exception, and platform exception, because I want a relevant message for the user to be appeared, so that in case if there is anything for the user he should do it right away instead of calling the support team. So first of all we have a throw exception. The Firebase auth exception will be caught using E. It has some code, so we are going to get that code, open this class. It is a custom class and it has bunch of already created codes, email already in use, invalid email, weak password, user disable, and list is keep on going. So these are the codes it's going to get using the switch statement. We're going to return the string which will be thrown back to user. So let's say if email already in use, we are going to display the email address is already registered, please use a different email. Same list is keep on going. This is only for the Firebase auth exception. If we head towards the Firebase exception, which is specifically for the Firebase, you will see the same approach. We have a code. We receive the code using unknown. We are going to display unknown Firebase error occurred down below. App is deleted. Be invalid sender. Credentials already in use. And at the end, using a default approach, we are going to display some default message. Then for the format exception, we have some format related errors because we don't have the code, so definitely these might not be useful, but just for the learning purpose you can display any relevant message for the format. Most of the time invalid email format, font format, date, and URLs, you have that code and you can utilize by this way. And then same for the platform, we get the code from the platform. If you see over here we have the code, e.code, we get it inside this constructor and using dot message, because this is a getter, so we pass the code, return whatever string we want to be displayed, and that message will be shown right away. Now for the sign in with Google, we first have to trigger the authentication flow. By the authentication flow I means that the pop-up which we are going to display to the user with all the list of emails. For that we are going to use Google sign in. So we will receive the Google sign in account from the user pop-up screen, name it anything, use the await sign because this query might take some time, and simply call the Google sign in like this. And then using the sign in method we will get the sign in account. So Google sign in is going to open the pop-up, and then this sign in is going to get whatever the value of that user. So everything will be performed from this single query. After that we have the user's account. Now we want that user to be authenticated using the Firebase. To let the user log in using the authentication, we need the OAuth of the Google sign in. So first we have to get the OAuth of the user, so which is Google sign in authentication, and I'm going to name it Google Auth or the Google authentication. Again we have to use the await sign and use the user account we created at the top, which can be nullable dot authentication. So what's the error? Okay, so error is that we have to add a question mark because this also can be null. We get the user current account, we get the authentication of that current account if that account is authenticated from the Google. Now we have to create that authentication for our Firebase. To do that, for most of the federated identities, Firebase use the credential approach. So for the credentials, we have a Google auth provider. Google Auth provider dot all the credentials. There are a bunch of other methods that you can use for the Google Auth provider. So for the credentials, we have two things. First one is access token, which we can get it from the Google authentication right at the top. It is nullable, so add a question mark dot get the access token and pass it. Next is the ID token. ID token, again we're going to use the Google Auth dot over here we have the ID token control alt L. So once we have the credentials, we have to pass those credentials to the Firebase and return those credentials back to the function which is calling the sign in with Google, so that we can use the user credentials and store the data of the user inside our Firestore. For that, we are going to return the statement or the result coming from this statement, which is await authentication dot Firebase connect. But you can also call Firebase auth dot instance, because we already have the Firebase auth dot instance created as a variable over here, so we can use this one. Authentication dot use the sign in with credentials and pass the credentials we have created over here. Now this is going to store the user inside the authentication and return those credentials of the user. And if meanwhile all these operations we are going to catch any exception, that exception will be thrown over here. If it's related to Firebase authentication, will be caught over here. For the Firebase exception, we will deal it over here, and the rest we have already covered. Now once we have completed this function, we will head towards the design. For the design, head towards the features, and inside the authentication, you can see we have controllers and screens, and we're going to go for the login. Inside the login, head towards the login.dart, and in here you can see we have T social buttons. It is a simple widget which has two buttons. The first one is the Google sign in, second one is the Facebook button. So inside this class, we first have to create the instance of the controller, because we already learned that design should not have anything related to backend. Design should be a separate design, and then we have a controller which is going to control everything right between the design and the backend. So authentication repository is going to deal with the authentication, which is related to Firebase, Firestore, Firebase storage, or any other database you have. Add all the functions related to the backend in the repository. Design will be in the design screens, and then we have a controller which will be in the center of these both and going to handle a single operation for each function. So now we are not going to do anything inside the design. So let's call that controller final controller using get.put. We are going to call the controllers. Get.put is the getX approach to call the class. It is going to just create a new instance. If you're not using getX, you can simply call new and name of the class. New is obsolete. You can directly call the class name to create its instance. But because we are using get.put, which is a getX feature, so we'll use this approach. We have already created login controller, so I'm going to use the same controller, and we will use this controller to call the function. So to call that function, on press of this icon button of the Google, we'll call the function controller dot Google sign in. Head towards the login controller, which we have inside the controllers. In the login, we have login controller over here. So previously we created email and password sign in, but today we are going to handle the Google sign in authentication. Create a function Google sign in. It is not returning anything, and it will be an async function because we have to call some operations which has a wait sign. So compiler should wait until that operation is finished using async approach. Next, we are going to use the try catch, and in the catch we are going to catch the error, whatever error thrown by the Firebase exception, Firebase authentication exception, format, or any other exception will be caught over here, and then we are going to display the error to the user using tloaders.error snackbar. Let me show you this class again. This is a tloader class, a simple class, and using static functions, we can easily call tloaders dot any of the function. And the function we created over here, which is error snackbar, is a simple get dot snackbar pop-up, or it is a snackbar. It has some title, message, dismissible, should icon, pearls, and some of the designs. So let's start with the function itself. In the try, the first thing we have to do is we have to start the loader, which will start loading when we're going to press the Google sign in. We'll use the t full screen dot open loading dialog. This is again a class, and this is a static function, so we can directly call this without creating instance. You can see this class, and we have a static method. So previously, people are asking in the previous video that they are unable to use this pop scope. The reason is that if they have the older version of the Flutter, previously it was will pop scope instead of pop scope. So when you are going to use the will pop scope, and if you have the latest up-to-date Flutter, you will see a depreciation line on that will pop scope, and it is going to suggest you that you have to convert convert to the pop scope. So you have to use this. It is a built in the Flutter, nothing new that I have added. And using can pop, you will be able to disable popping of the back button. So it is again a simple loader which is going to open animation loader dialog. So this is the animation widget. It has one text, one lottie asset which will be animating, and then have a boolean check either you want to display a button or not. Then we have a stop loading, navigator of context dot pop. So start the loading. Then we are going to check the internet connection using network manager, which we have created. We use the connectivity plus. When you head towards the pub spec and see the connectivity plus over here, we use this package and created some defined classes, which is a connectivity class using a stream subscription. We have already subscribed. Whenever there is no internet, it is going to trigger this function because we are listening to this function, and whenever it is going to be triggered, it is going to check if there is connection. Result is none. It is going to display the snack bar that there is no internet connection. Instead of that specific message, I'm going to create a custom toast, which is a snack bar, and using that snack bar, I am displaying a custom toast. So displaying it over here, connectivity. After that, this is a custom function is connected. Whenever this is going to be called, it is going to check the connectivity, which is the connectivity package instance, and call the check connectivity function. If result is none, return false. This means that it is not connected. If it is true, this means that it's connected. And if there is any platform exception, we will display false again. And after that, we have a close to cancel the subscription. And in here, when we are going to call network manager dot is connected variable, when if it is going to return true, we're going to check over here if it's connected. We will not going to do anything if it is not connected. Using the not sign, we will stop the loading and simply return. So stop loading is over here, navigator dot of context. So we'll stop the loading and return. So return is must. If you're not going to call the return, you will definitely be redirected to the next screens and compiler will start compiling the next part. Now we have to call the Google authentication. So to receive credentials, use user credentials is equal to now call the authentication repository dot instance. This is going to call get dot find feature because we have a getter which is dot instance. Get dot find is going to find the instance which we have already created using get dot put. So if you remember, we created login controller instance using get.put because we was not sure that either the login controller instance is already created or not. So that's why we have to use get.put. Otherwise, we will definitely be facing some error. So in here, authentication repository is already created inside the main.dart. Whenever the Firebase is going to be initialized, we use the get.put to create the first instance of authentication repository. And then whenever we want to use authentication, we can simply call get.find and it is going to return the authentication of authentication repository. So use this instance dot we can call sign in with Google function. Now it is going to perform all the authentication, return us the user credentials, and also we have to call the await sign. Now as we have already created the sign in with Google, we have the user credentials. Now we want to store these user credentials inside the Firestore, and this is what I'm not going to do over here because maybe we have Google sign in, we have Facebook sign in with Apple, and bunch of other federated identity sign-ins. So we cannot redo again and again the Google sign in over here. And also the job of the controller is very obvious that controller should not deal with the functions which is not related to its own. Let's say we have the login controller. Storing data is not the responsibility of login controller, right? Storing user data should be the responsibility of user controller. So instead of creating a login controller over here, not inside this authentication, inside the personalization, in the controllers, create a new file, user controller.art, you name it user controller and extend it with a getX controller. Now also we want to use getX, and for that I'm going to call static user controller. So whenever we want to use user controller dot instance later on, when the first instance of user controller is created, later on we want to use the same instance throughout our class, and we don't want to call get dot put. So for that I'm going to create this getter using get, name it instance, and next we have a function using fat arrows. We can create a single line function, and that function is simply going to return get dot find. Now it is going to find this instance from the memory. So whenever there is any instance, it is going to return. So we can easily use user controller dot instance. So in here I've created a function save user record, which is a future type of void, not returning anything, and an async operation it is going to perform. It will definitely get the user credentials from any of the federated identity. We'll use the same approach, try and catch. In the catch, we're going to display the loader, which is warning snack bar. We have a title and message. because currently we didn't yet get the user data from the authentication, and we are not using the user data inside our application. So we're not going to add additional check over here, which is going to check that if user is already logged in and if user data is already stored or not. So this is what we are not going to check over here, because that will be very soon at this stage. We will definitely going to come back to this stage in the next videos. For now, we are only going to check if user credential is not is equal to null. The first thing we have to do is we have to convert the display name which we get from the user credentials to first name and last name, because we are storing the data in the first name and last name variables. Final use the name parts, user model.name parts, and we will store the name parts because we first have to divide into part 1, part 2. Let's say we have 3 parts of any name or 2 parts, first name and last name. So we have to convert it using a model which is a user model we have already created for the user. We have ID, first name, last name, username, email, phone number, and profile picture. Now we want to map that data on to this model so that we can store it. And inside you can see I have a helper function which is a full name. Simply add first name and last name variable from here and return it as a full name. Then we have a formatted phone number. Same way I have a name parts which have a list of strings. It is going to get any name, split it into half using the spaces. So let's say we have a full name which is coding with P. So we have 3 names with the 2 spaces. So it is going to get that, divide it into name parts, return the list, we can use it. Same way we can generate a username. So it is going to split first using spaces, get the name parts. As a first, it is going to convert it into the lowercase, and the rest all the remaining will be used as a lowercase as a last name. Combine first and last name, add some prefix, return the username. So these are some of the helper functions. Now to get the name from the user credentials or from the Google, we have to call user credentials dot user property. This can be null, so we know we have some data. So we're going to call user dot display name. As this display name can be null, so double question mark, add single quotes. This means that if display name is null, return empty string. In the same way, we are going to generate the username dot generate username, and we want to generate the username for the same display name. Definitely, if you want a unique usernames, you can do any other approach. Now we have to map the data on the user model. So the first thing is the ID. We want to store the user using the ID which is being used in the Firestore. If you head towards the Firebase console inside the authentication, you see every user has a unique UID. So we want to use this UID, and using that UID we want to create the document of the user or store the user data inside the Firestore. So you can see the user we created in our email and password authentication and also store user tutorial. You can see this email and it has a UID which is starting from WK3A, and the same ID is over here with the same email and rest of the data. There is no password. So this is what we want to do. So for the UID we have to get the UID from the credentials, call the user dot UID. For the first name we are going to call the name parts, add 0 index will be the first name using this one because it is going to return a list of strings. So first one will be the first name, last one will be the last name. So to get the last name, it might have 2 to 3 characters. So for that we have to check if name parts dot length is greater than 1. We will use name part dot sublist. Sublist means that the remaining list. So remaining list, where we want to start this remaining list from the first index, because 0 is already stored. It is going to start from the first index and return the complete remaining parts. We will join all of them using the space, and in the else we're not going to do anything. And as a username, we already have a username at the top. For the email, again use user credential dot user dot, we have email property. This email can be null, so if it is null we are not going to do or store anything. Same goes for the phone number and file picture. If we have anything in the photo URL, we are going to return it, otherwise we're not going to return anything. So next, to store the data, create instance of the user repository using get.put and call the user repository. Previously, we have created save user record function. We use some of the exceptions and we call the database.collection, which is the user collection dot document. This is the ID which we stored in the user dot ID because we return the user model. Using dot ID, this new ID document will be created. Then in the set, we're going to convert the complete user model into JSON format like this, because we have to convert data into JSON. then we can store it. So once we convert this data, we store it into the Firestore. So if this action is going to be completed, we're not going to get any exception. This means that user data is stored. We're going to save user data using await sign. We're going to use the user repository, which is this one created at the top, dot save user record, and pass the new user we have just created to this one, and it is going to deal rest of the operations. And currently that's it for this function. Later on in this function, we are going to check if user already stored inside the database or not. And if it is stored, we will not going to perform anything to this function. So let's close this controller, back to the Google sign-in function, and in here now we can easily call save user record. So first we have to call controller at the top. We will call the user controller using get.put and create the instance of the user controller. You can do all of these operations in a one single function, but definitely for the separation of concern, for the readability, for the reusability, you have to follow these procedures. Call the wait sign, use user controller dot save user record, and pass user credentials, and that's it. Now this function is going to store the user record for us. If there is any exception, we will catch that exception over here. Once record is stored, we want to remove the loader. Call full screen loader dot stop loading, and also if there is any exception, we also want to remove first loading, then we want to display the error, and at the end we are going to redirect user using authentication repository dot instance, call the screen redirect. So this is the function we created in our previous tutorial, and we see how we can get the logged in user. So we have the authentication firebase auth dot instance dot current user. So this is the state of the logged in user. If you want to use the current user inside your application which is logged in, you just have to call firebase auth dot instance dot current user. So this is going to return the state of your user. If user is not is equal to null, this means the user is logged in. We will check if email is verified of this user. If not, we will redirect user to the verify email screen and pass the email. If user email is also verified, we will let the user to the navigation menu, which is basically the home screen. And if it is not the case, user is not signed in, we are going to use the local storage to check if it is the first time of the user. We will display the onboarding screen, and if it is not the first time, we will simply display the login screen to the logged out user. Okay, so let's run the application. And also I'm going to talk about that if you're going to run this application inside this run main.dart, it is not going to let you debug anything. So make sure when you are dealing with the backend, run things in the debug mode, which is or debug main.dart. Okay, so our application is running, and you can see we also have email and password inside already using the memory feature. But when we are going to click on this Google button, we are expecting a pop-up. It is loading. So loader appears, and you can see we have a nice loader. Now we can click on any of the email which we want to be logged in. So let's click on it. Again, it's loading and we are redirected to the main.dart. This means that user is successfully logged in. When you head towards the profile, down below we have a logout button. So for the logout button, I have just added a new line which is using a wait sign, call Google sign in dot sign out button, just right on top of the Firebase auth instance dot sign out to let the user sign out. And after that, we are redirecting back to the login screen. So when we're going to click on this logout, it is going to log out back to the previous screen. You can also display a loader over here. For the next tutorial, we're not going to go for the Facebook sign-in because there are some issues currently going on with the Facebook developer account. They're not letting the developers to create a test accounts. I don't know what's the reason, but there is a reason because they're currently temporarily blocked the service of creating the test accounts, and without test accounts, it's very hard to test the Flutter app using Facebook authentication. And for the real devices, we have to upload our device on the Apple Store or on the Google App Store. So we'll cover that in the upcoming days or maybe at the end of this playlist. Don't worry about that. We will get back to the Facebook login as well. But for the next tutorial, we're going to see how we can click on this forget password and deal with the forget password and reset the password using Firebase. So that's it for today's tutorial. I hope you learned something new. If you learned something new, please like the video. And if you have any question, you can ask me down below in the comments. You can also download the complete code from the description below. So stay tuned. Thank you for watching. Take care. Allah Hafiz.